Before I mention some of the things that I have here as part of this exhibit and what other features are seen on the wall and paintings, I did want to mention migration as a concept that I think deserves more and more attention, not simply because of what I've just previously mentioned, but because of what it means to understand what we can do to accommodate species in movement. We migrate, think of snowbirds headed to the southwest. Probably some of them are packing their bags ready for the winter here. Going down, Phoenix heat will relent and they can go down and enjoy the weather. Well, that kind of movement of people has been going on ever since the ice bridge was employed by people from the continent of Asia to come over to North America as one of the means of getting here. But mostly, I think we think of migration and the subtleties of it with other species. And if we understand it, just in a very modest way, I think we become to appreciate the complexities of the life around us. I mean, it's an invitation to see the geese overhead. Let's say you go to the Skagit this winter. They're going to be coming in probably in late October or sooner. The great trumpeter swans, one of the largest flying birds in the world, 7.5-foot wingspan. They'll be in right behind them, along with an abundance of waterfowl. You can sit there on the edge of one of the access areas for the public and imagine the dynamics of these species coming in from different points of the North American continent, principally, some of them all the way from the Arctic, to winter here. And that area up there that has been maintained, even though it's changed through agriculture, but it's still maintained as a feeding area, is critical to the future of these species. And frankly, I think a lot of the farmers up there, and it's one of their challenges, that they've got too many snow geese. Because when I came up here 60 years ago and would go up there as a kid, snow geese were few and far between and virtually no swans. But then with conservation, enforcement of some of the regulations to protect these species, they've come back. But now we have a dynamic of keeping that area viable for agriculture, which is critical, but also opening it and continuing to make it available to wildlife as well. There's another kind of migration, and some of it, it's absolutely mind-boggling. The bar-tailed godwit, which is one of the shorebirds that you'd see if you were up on the Skagit and you walked along one of the access areas along the rivers or into the intertidal area of Skagit Bay, you'll see the shorebirds going back and forth. We don't get the bar-tailed godwit here because it leaves the Arctic, I don't think it's in that direction, it leaves the Arctic about now, as fall is setting in, based on its prep for a long flight, its readiness, because it's been feeding all summer, and by virtue of the light conditions and the change in temperature, these are clues, along with, and you don't want to ever forget, what you'd call the sage of the flock, the experienced adults that know not only when it's ready to go from experience, but where to go and how to get there. Here's a bird, and it practically overwhelms me when I think of it, gets into the air and nonstop flies 8,500 miles over the Pacific Ocean. No stops. It doesn't swim. It keeps flying. And it does so because of all this strength that it has in its body. And it also, as we begin to think about them, literally and figuratively, has a capacity to put part of its brain to sleep while the other part of it continues to operate. So these wonderful dynamics that other species have, we're starting to discover because we're thinking about migration alone. And I mean, that is only one of innumerable examples of what migration can open up in the way of discoveries to us all. Hi. We've been talking about migration and the movement, and I just mentioned the startling, and I think to me mind-boggling example of the bar-tailed godwit that flies all the way from the Arctic nonstop, 8,500 miles across the Pacific in the flock, right together, gets to Tasmania, and boy, is it hungry. It's probably lost 2/3 of its body weight or more. And you might say it's on the edge of survival. Now, looking into Tasmanian conservation programs, the world is looking at, hey, what can we do and what can the people there do to protect that wintering ground for this critical species?
Do they also go to New Zealand?
I'm sorry?
Do they also go to New Zealand?
I think they do, yeah. On one of their routes, it could be coming back, it could be going down, but they banded one of the birds, and it actually has a nickname. I've forgotten what it is. I think it was a female. And so they radio tagged it, and they found her. She was still alive and functioning. And that's the one they had banded up in the Arctic, where she left from. The other dynamic that I have followed ever since I got up here, because I've always been fascinated with owls, is the snowy owl, which is often featured in the newspaper here when one shows up. Well, why wouldn't it be? It's big. It's a member of the class, the same class that this painting of mine back here of the great horned owl, it's the bubo group, and they are the biggest of owls. And of course, the eagle owl in the Arctic is the largest of all the owls, and it's one that fishes. It's a fishing owl. But the snowy owl comes down here not by migration, but through what they call eruption. The population in the Arctic was great because there was plenty of voles and lemmings to feed the youngsters. And now there are snowy owls in the fall crowding the prey base to where there's such competition, the younger ones are pushed out by the established adults. That's the way it appears, even though there's kinship and everything else. Hey, we're feeding, you're on your own, you know what to eat, go get it. So the movement has taken the snowy owls thousands of miles from where they were hatched all the way down to places like Florida and Mexico occasionally. And you can imagine going down to the beach in Miami and here's a snowy owl standing on a wharf somewhere waiting for a rat to come out. Well, they do. And they make it back for the most part. It's not a one-way trip. And then subsequent, of course, through the winter into the fall, by the time they get back, recovery of population of prey will give them a feeding up, and they're going to be okay, we think, for the most part. They're survivors. The experience that I've had, and I recommend, believe me, among many things that we can do here in the Northwest, taking a trip up to the floodplains here in Salish Sea, Greater Puget Sound. The one that I'm most familiar with is the Skagit floodplain, which I've mentioned. Because not only are you going to see the waterfowl, but you're going to see the wintering raptors, the birds of prey, that will follow the waterfowl. And you, again, begin to think, well, the peregrine falcon is here because of the shorebirds. And where the shorebirds go, you're going to see the peregrines. So when you see these big flock of western sandpipers, and I'm talking about sometimes 10,000 birds in a flock that flashes from light underside to dark backside, the murmurations of starlings, if you ever watched that, we get shorebirds doing the same thing. And it's a mystery still as to how they take their cues to make those incredible, are they having fun up there? Is this part of a maneuver? And when you watch a peregrine that's perched off to one side, as you can do at the access points up there, watching these shorebirds going back and forth, you begin to think that maybe this is a strategy to elude or confuse a predator. Well, eventually, the peregrine I've watched is going to fly right out into the middle of them and possibly nab a meal. But the snowy owl is a stationary hunter. It's just going to hang out, and they hunt day, they hunt at night. And in the book that we have here called The House of Owls, I have a picture of my youngest daughter, our youngest daughter, standing there looking at me like this, and behind her, which was an actual fact, 6 snowy owls that had come down to winter and were totally indifferent because they're so innocent. I mean, that's the other thing. The innocence of the species, not having company with flashing guns and intrusive flocks of, or not flocks, but groups of people and pushing this, that, and the other thing. They are accessible in terms of proximity. Not that you're going to barge in on them so much, but you can approach them. And it was great for me to put that into the book and mention some of this very thing. There was a time up on the Samish Flats, which is above the Skagit Flats and equally interesting to visit, where there was a cabbage field that apparently had been occupied by a lot of, I guess, either gophers, probably gophers, because there were 22 snowy owls dotted around this cabbage field, just waiting for the next appearance of whatever it was that was the rodent that was taking advantage of that fall crop or early winter condition. And again, not that I was going to go out and walk into the middle of them, but I could be approximately 15 or 20 feet, and the snowy owl, saw me, and then often you see them going like this, bobbing their head around. What they're doing is getting the focus on the back of their retina, and they're getting a sharper focus of what you're all about. And I didn't seem to be any threat to them, so I just took it all in, soaked them up. And of course, as an artist, I try to take that image and that emotion and that momentum and feeling that I have and put it into a drawing, principally to start, and eventually into a sculpture, and then perhaps into some narrative that I want to write about as well. Okay, the last item, since one other thing that I haven't seen too much written about, but I did witness out on the Pacific Beach one winter. 6 snowy owls on the edge of a beached whale, and it had been dead for some time, and I couldn't tell whether they were carrion consuming owls. That's not normally what owls do, because they catch live prey. They prefer it, although they will eat roadkills as they do on San Juan Island. But I'd like to take some questions, but before I do that, I was saying to Donald that I really don't wake up and get into the moment unless I can do a few owl calls. Okay, I won't do that. Well, listen. That's the other thing we can do. The use of the senses, and that we use migration as a leverage point to apply ourselves to the mysteries around it and get deeper into our understanding of it. But using the senses is often overlooked because of the world we're living in. The technology is just kind of overwhelmed, like that. But when you can hear, and I used to hear a lot better than I do now, I could hear perhaps 2 different species of owls in our neighborhood calling during the spring, because that's when they're most active. This is my place. Are there any males are singing? Females listening? Hey, I got a great place here. Come on over, take a look. And I'm almost like that, because the females will hear the chanting or the whoop, 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 which is the screech owl. It doesn't screech, not the western screech owl, different species. And it will continue, and I have a drawing in the book, The House of Owls, about the male going this way, whoop, 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 going this way, whoop, 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 and doing it night after night. And then one night, lo and behold, I'm out there, because I had a nesting box where I was hoping they were going to occupy. You hear a distant whoop, 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 whoop. And sure enough, in comes the female, and the light was such that she took a look at the facilities that were there. And that is something that continues to go on. Now we have, of course, the barred owl, which is an invasive if you want to call it that. It made its way west. That was movement. It wasn't an eruption. It was just simply tracking the highways where we had rest stops. We'd put out garbage. Rats eventually occupied those areas, and barred owls moved with the rest stops from the East Coast. And now they're here, and they eat a lot of things, including other owls, and have displaced the spotted owl. You may have seen some of that in the newspaper. And as far as I'm concerned, we're shooting the messenger by shooting the barred owls. But some clear control needs to be done, including eliminating any more taking of the old growth habitat that the spotted owl is so dependent upon, restoring other habitat and getting corridors between these little islands of habitat so the owls can interrelate, and then discouraging by trapping any lots of different means other than just shooting randomly, which is, again, the fastest way out. And I when I saw that decision, I was thought, God, where have these folks been? It's only going to lead to another difficulty. And of course, the loss of a species like the spotted owl could occur. But the great horned owl is one that also, because it's competitive with the barred owl, is not as frequently heard as it used to be, because you got that barred owl out there doing a great job on all the rats that seem to follow us wherever we go. But if you listened a little bit out from the immediate area, you'd hear both screech owls and the great horned owl. But in between, you'd hear a call like this. What the heck was that? That's the barred owl. And the imitation of who cooks for you is one way of remembering how that call sounds. And they are out there, and you tend to hear them a lot more than you would hear That's the great horned owl. And up on Lopez Island, where I have a studio, the great horn is still there, as is the screech owl to some degree. But the barred owl has also made an appearance. So we'll see how that is sorted out. Okay, well, I've rambled here. I mentioned all the stories that are associated with many of the depictions of the birds here in the habitat. And I find that when I look at them, I kind of get into the image, obviously, and then I get into the moment that they depict. Those are slate carvings from a salvaged pool table, one of many that I've salvaged over the years. And the subjects are identified from tree swallow, night heron, poorwill, kingfisher, and the mergans are over here in bronze, preening. Which if you go out to Magnuson Park, you're likely to catch some of the mergansers that are going to be coming in there, because they do breed in Magnuson, and it's another great approximate, easy to get to a location where wonderful habitat has been restored. We're getting the birds coming back. Okay, well, I've rambled here for some time, and I'd love to take a few questions if you have some, so yeah, please. Sure.
Question and comment. Is that a poorwill, or what is that sculpture over there?
Oh, my God, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's the one I was going to start with. This is a nighthawk, lesser nighthawk. We get the greater nighthawk up here. And here's a migratory bird that comes in the summer. And when I first came up here and was teaching school at the high school out in the North End, a nighthawk nested in a little garden inside the school itself. It had found a perfect place away from the dogs and cats and everything else. And of course, now the challenge was to keep the kids involved in understanding this beautiful little bird that was so tame and innocent, brooding its young, and not overwhelming it. But since that time, a lot of that habitat has been lost. The nighthawks are not nearly as frequent. They're the ones that you would hear on a summer evening, used to hear anyway, and possibly sometimes around Seattle. Whack, whack, kind of whack. That's not a great imitation of the nighthawk, but they're right at the waning of the light of the day, and then through the night, they're up there coursing the sky and picking up the insects that come up off the ground into the in-between areas and catching their food. And they nest up there as well. Had one nesting right off at the edge of the bluff up on Lopez one year itself. But that bird leaves, let's say it left, and it's gone now. It's headed back south, all the way to Argentina, and then returns. So the birds we're seeing up here are well-traveled, to say the least. And there again, to me, it's just an overwhelming imaginative moment to consider that journey that they're taking. And where are the stops that they learn about? Of course, they're often in company with other nighthawks, and there's the more knowledgeable ones to say that, or to know where to go to get food, because they've got to get out of there. And then there's the habitat that's still there and available to them. And then you think they're often in that direction to Argentina, at least headed, well, they follow the continent rather than going over open water. They'll follow the continents through Central America to Argentina and then back up again. But think about the little ruby-throated hummingbird. Like we have the rufous. It goes all the way to Costa Rica every year and then comes back to your hummingbird feeder. Well, that's a fur piece. And the ruby-throated, and it goes down the continent. The ruby-throated hummingbird, same size, like my thumb, flies all the way across the Gulf of Mexico, open water. And they couldn't figure out how the heck does this little dynamic bird get all the way across hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles to a continent that it can begin to feed. Well, at one time they had, and theories are always kind of interesting, unless they're conspiracy theories, and we're seeing a lot of those these days, but that's another subject. The theory was, since the raptors will get up and fly from North America across the same stretch, but they will use the thermals. They will rise up in the heat, and then they get in the currents of air, and basically, with a few wing beats, spend a lot of their time floating into the south portions of the hemisphere. And they thought that the ruby-throated hummingbird was hitchhiking on the backs of some of the raptors. Now that would have been fascinating. You know, what's that? You know, yeah, do you have a seat belt? It's kind of rough up here. No, they just do it on their energy and their supplies, just like the bar-tailed godwit has this enormous strength to fly 8,500 miles. That little hummingbird gets up there and does use the currents to some degree, but makes the flight on its own.